What's up, everybody, and welcome back to Fireside Giants. I'm your host, Anthony Rivardo, joined by my co-host, Alex Wilson. And once again, we want to talk about the Giants wide receivers, but today, not so much talking about the starting receivers. We just broke down Malik Nabers and Jalen Hyatt yesterday, the way that they looked at OTAs, but we want to take a closer look at somebody on the back end of the Giants roster, someone who's kind of gone under the radar after getting a lot of buzz last offseason. Bryce Ford-Wheaton, former undrafted free agent out of West Virginia that the Giants signed last offseason, was really popping off at camp. Absolute freak athlete, very fast, very tall, very physical. Tore his ACL, though, in training camp last year, missed the entirety of his rookie season. But now bouncing back from that injury, looking really good at this year's OTAs and hopefully trying to make a roster spot with the Giants this season. And, you know, we've seen undrafted free agents for the Giants make waves before. Can anybody remember who I'm talking about? Victor Cruz, 2011. We all know that story. In the 2010 preseason, was making waves, tore his ACL, bounced back the next year, and of course turned into an all-pro wideout. Maybe that happens with Bryce Ford-Wheaton. Probably not, but we do want to discuss his potential and what he could bring to the team if he does make the roster and kind of look at his path to making the roster throughout this winding off season. But let's go ahead and dive into it. Before we do so, make sure to leave a like if you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to the channel if you're new, ring the bell so don't miss an episode, and comment your thoughts down below in the comment section. If you're listening to Apple or Spotify, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review. Go ahead and follow us on all of our social media channels at Fireside Giants. Without further ado, Alex, how are you doing today, my friend? And how are you feeling about Bryce Ford-Wheaton as he battles back from this injury and tries to make the Giants roster?
I'm doing pretty good. And listen, I know we've talked about Malik Nabers, as you referenced, all these top receivers, but one of those like kind of low-key fan favorites is Bryce Ford-Wheaton. He has a really good athletic profile, really good size. You know, he can, primarily played on the outside during his collegiate career, but the Giants, before he went down, I think it was in the third preseason game with the torn ACL, they were putting him inside and out. They were trying to figure out, like, where can this guy play? Can he be a bigger guy in the slot? Is he going to be mostly a boundary guy? Can he help on special teams? Now, this is one of those situations where the Giants have a lot of depth, right? You have Malik Nabers, Wan'Dale Robinson, Isaiah Hodgins, Darius Slayton, Jalen Hyatt, and then you have a couple of other guys competing for reps, notably guys like Isaiah McKenzie. There is room for Bryce Ford-Wheaton to make this roster as the number 6 receiver in this unit. I don't think the Giants are going to be carrying 7 receivers. I think probably 6 is the max. So there's one spot there up for grabs. Now the Giants view Isaiah McKenzie, a guy that's been with Buffalo before, a lot of experience, and obviously has been, has a tangible connection with Joe Shane and Brian Daboll. So there is a little bit more leverage and advantageous kind of chemistry between those guys and Isaiah McKenzie, but that doesn't mean Bryce Ford-Wheaton is left out of the equation. I think that he has the talent to carve a rollout on this team. I just think he has to offer something on special teams is like really where he's going to be able to crack this roster. I don't think I'm rostering Ford-Wheaton just to be a backup receiver. He's got to be something, whether it be a punt gunner or anything really. Do you feel the same way about it? Because I feel like on special teams, like that's where you kind of have to be valuable, like a Gunnar Olszewski. You know what I mean? Like you're a backup until, unless you're, obviously making an impact on the special teams unit. Do you think that Bryce Ford-Wheaton can carve out a role there? What is that role? And do you think that will give him a little bit more of leverage to actually make this team?
It's hard to project what his role might be on special teams, but I do agree with you in the sense that for Bryce Ford-Wheaton and pretty much every undrafted free agent, wide receiver, or specialist, kind of playmaking player, having an impact on special teams is your path to making an NFL roster more often than not. So for Ford-Wheaton, if he's able to kind of turn heads as, let's say, a gunner on the punt coverage unit at OTAs and at training camp, then he really improves his ability to make this roster. And also keep in mind, Alex, the new return specialist, the way that that's going to look this season on kickoffs is far different than it's looked in the past. And that skill set that you need to play that new kick return role might cater towards the skill set that Bryce Ford-Wheaton possesses. Again, physical, fast, tackle breaking, athleticism, all those things. If he can prove to maintain that coming off of this injury and be a bit of an open space tackle breaker, maybe he does make an impact as the kick returner during OTAs or during training camp rather and into the preseason, and that could also be a path for him to make the roster with the ball in his hands on special teams. Although I think that we've discussed some of these other players that we think are more suited to that role. Gunnar Olszewski, as you mentioned, Tyrone Tracy, 5th-round rookie running back. I think that he could work wonders in that new kick return role. But Bryce Ford-Wheaton making an impact on special teams, you're right, Alex, it is very important. But I do want to discuss how he can make an impact outside of making a roster spot and being one of the backup receivers. And to me, his greatest value that he can contribute to the Giants almost immediately will be on the practice squad. And let me explain. The reason that I feel this way is because the Giants in the NFC East face a lot of really talented wide receivers, and some of them are very big and very physical. Namely, A.J. Brown. A.J. Brown is 6'1", just pure piece of muscle who moves cornerbacks out of the way and makes Randy Moss-esque receptions sometimes, right? We all know that about A.J. Brown. And the Eagles' receiving core is really good. They also have Devontae Smith, of course. But the Giants, having now a 6'3" freak athlete on their practice squad, will allow them to emulate what it's like to go up against guys like A.J. Brown. So for these young cornerbacks, let's say Cordell Flott as he enters year 3, Deontay Banks entering year 2, or Andrew Phillips, a rookie, that's the best example. These guys need to get used to facing off against freak athletes and really physical wide receivers. The Giants, yeah, they have Malik Nabers, who is physical, but having depth in that physicality during practice is important. So Bryce Ford-Wheaton can play a really important role for this Giants team, playing as a core practice squad player and emulating some of the other receivers that the Giants may face, giving the cornerbacks practice against more physical opponents, which is very important and very underrated. And Alex, I remember a few years ago on this channel, we had on Brandon London, who now works with the New York Post, but worked for the New York Giants for a little while, used to be a special or a practice squad player for the Giants, and he explained to us how his role in that Super Bowl run in the 2007-8 season was very important because he was able to emulate things on the practice squad that translated to the game versus the New England Patriots in the Super Bowl. I will always remember him kind of giving us that anecdotal story because it really opened my eyes to the value that practice squad players bring to an NFL team. And so when you're looking at the potential that Bryce Ford-Wheaton can have with this team, yes, we would love to see him make this roster and have that Victor Cruz storyline where he turns into an absolute stud in the regular season. But realistically, he could still make a significant impact on this team on the practice squad because of the unique skill set that he possesses. He really could be one of the most valuable practice players in the NFL, and especially for the New York Giants. So, Alex, I do kind of want to hear your take on that as well, see if you kind of agree with my point that maybe the most value he can provide to this team immediately is actually on the practice squad, and the Giants might have a very valuable practice player here in Bryce Ford-Wheaton.
And really that's where I was going to kind of go with this entire conversation was like he probably ends up on the practice squad. He's got to really step up and offer something on special teams and have a really good summer at receiver to make this team. But having a good player on the practice squad is never a bad thing. Look, another team could see Bryce Ford-Wheaton and say, well, he's bouncing back looking really good. Let's go steal him, just kind of like what we did. Not the same exact thing, but kind of like what the Giants did when the Jets cut Jason Pinnock. We were like, hey, like that guy is pretty good, and now he's our starting strong safety, and it's been pretty good for us. So teams find value. Now, receiver is definitely one of those positions that you either have a good unit or you don't, and a lot of teams have bad wide receiver units, and Bryce Ford-Wheaton may be somebody that could crack a roster on a much lesser team. Not that the Giants are that good, but I think Malik Nabers gives us a much better wide receiver core than we previously had. So I do think that he's a very big candidate for that, practice squad kind of role. Stashing a player like that in case of any injuries is not a bad problem to have. In fact, it's kind of an embarrassment of riches if you think about it in a lot of ways. I think this Giants wide receiver core, and I said it yesterday, I think this unit is heavily underrated, right? I think Malik Nabers is going to be a very cheap superstar. If he reaches his potential, I'm not going to guarantee it. If he reaches his potential, he'll be a very cheap superstar for the next 5 years. Even his fifth-year option will be cheap in comparison with the contracts are going to look like then. You look at, Wandale, one of my favorite players on this team. I'm willing to bet he has a very good season as long as the offensive line steps up and plays relatively well. Even if the offensive line doesn't play well, he's open so early in his routes that he will be a productive player. Jalen Hyatt, he's gotten bigger and stronger, confidence. Brian Dable has been saying a lot of really great things about him, so I do think that Jalen Hyatt will take a step forward too. And then you have Darius Slayton, who's like on another team, a pretty solid WR2. So you have a really good slot receiver in Wandale. You have a potential superstar in Malik Nabers. You have a pretty solid WR2 and Darius Slayton, a guy who can blow the top off of a defense, and Jalen Hyatt. And I also think that Isaiah Hodgins is like your number 5 here is a really good problem to have. Isaiah Hodgins is a productive player, really good red zone receiver. He will get his reps, he'll get his opportunities. Having him as your depth piece is a luxury, right? So I do think this unit on paper looks pretty solid. I think in on the field is pretty solid. But having Bryce Ford-Wheaton, who's a freak athlete coming around from an ACL tear, give him that time to reacclimate, give him that time to get his, kind of get his groove back and his rhythm. And I think we'll be in a good spot in terms of our depth at receiver. This team is this unit is trending in a much better direction than it has in the past. Finally getting that WR1, at least the upside to be that superstar. So I'm pretty optimistic, but I think Bryce Ford-Wheaton, fan favorite. I think he ends up on the practice squad, but if any injuries arise, I think he might be the first one called up.
Yeah, and that's a great point as well. If he does continue to impress during the summer practices, makes the practice squad, there is definitely an opportunity for him to see some sort of regular season playing time. And Giants fans should know that well, because over the past several years, we've seen a lot of practice squad players take the field for the Giants, particularly in the receiving core. The Giants have battled a lot of injuries at wide receiver over the past several years, and you can't plan for those things. So even though we've upgraded this wide receiver core, and we do have a lot of talent, and obviously, like you said, it's a great problem to have Isaiah Hodgins as your WR5, right? Competing to even make the roster and competing for playing time. But injuries happen. So guys like WR5 and WR6 and even onto the practice squad once you get to WR7, 8, and 9, sometimes those guys have to take the field, and you will see them play on Sundays, Mondays, and Thursdays, even if you don't necessarily want them to. But having extra depth past the regular season roster and into the practice squad, that's huge. Knowing how often the Giants get injured and knowing how important it is to have that depth and have those players ready and available to step up at all times. So Bryce Ford-Wheaton not only able to make an impact on the practice squad, but potentially in the regular season. But Alex, what are you looking for from Bryce Ford-Wheaton for the rest of the summer? Because we know that there are improvements that he needs to make to his game. We know that obviously there are the strengths that he has with his traits and his athleticism and physicality. But what can he do in the preseason, or in training camp rather, that might make you say, okay, the Giants should actually roster this kid, not just put him on the practice squad so that somebody can steal him, but they should absolutely give him a regular season roster spot. What can he do to solidify that spot?
I think he's got to help diversify his game and offer a little bit in the slot. I think we have too many boundary guys now. Neighbors can play outside, Jalen Hyatt can play outside, Slayton can play outside, Hodgins plays outside. We don't need another outside boundary guy. We need another guy that can operate in the slot as well, a more versatile piece, because you look at Wandale behind him. What do you have, right? It's Isaiah. It's really just Isaiah McKenzie. So you don't really have much depth there. Bryce Ford-Wheaton, traditionally an outside receiver, he's got to acclimate and get better in the slot, in the Z. He's got to be a little bit more versatile. And I think come up with the catches, man. Show good hands. Show that you're back from the injury. Bounce back. Show that work ethic. Brian Daboll seems to reward players that show great work ethic. If he can do that and, display some versatility in his alignments, I think that he could have a much better chance at cracking this roster. And also, providing some value on special teams would certainly not hurt his case.
Yeah, I definitely think providing some value on special teams would be the number one way for him to boost his chances of making the roster. But I do also like what you mentioned there with diversifying his skill set, being able to work inside and outside. Very important for a receiver battling for a roster spot, especially with Wheaton having all of the size, strength, and physicality to play outside. But the Giants now having players that they want on the outside in Malik Neighbors and Jalen Hyatt, Darius Slayton, and like you said, Isaiah Hodgins. All those guys primarily play on the outside. However, you do also have to point out Hyatt, Neighbors, they can move inside outside. So there is a little bit of an opportunity for Bryce Ford-Wheaton to see some playing time as an outside receiver throughout the preseason. But I think that's really where he can make a name for himself. Tommy DeVito, that's pretty much how he solidified himself as the QB3 for this team. Through the preseason, he had some decent reps out there and started to flash some potential. We really liked what we saw from Tommy DeVito in the preseason, Alex, if you remember. And then eventually, when the Giants had some injuries at quarterback, Tommy DeVito got the nod to get the regular season roster spot, eventually ended up starting for this team and winning a few games for the Giants. So Bryce Ford-Wheaton, if he makes an impact, shows out during preseason, makes some plays, maybe scores a few touchdowns, he could be that next man up, that guy who, if the Giants do have injuries throughout the regular season, his preseason performances could earn him that roster spot off of the practice squad once they need to make some call-ups during the year. So definitely keeping a close eye on Bryce Ford-Wheaton for the rest of the offseason. It's going to be really intriguing to see how he performs in training camp and, of course, into the preseason. Maybe we'll see him in the regular season. Who knows? But we do really like this kid. We think he's very talented, and he definitely has the potential to make some sort of an impact for the Giants, whether it be behind the scenes in practice or eventually eventually on the regular season field. We'll, of course, continue to keep you updated on Ford-Wheaton and any other rookies or young players that are popping off for the Giants during training camp right here on Fireside Giants. So, make sure to leave a like if you enjoyed this episode. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. Ring the bell so don't miss an episode, and comment your thoughts down below in the comment section. If you're listening to Apple or Spotify, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review. Go ahead and follow us on all of our social media channels at Fireside Giants. Without further ado, we'll catch you on the next one. Have a good one, and let's go Giants.